And let me begin by warmly welcoming all of you. I'm so honored to be with you at this presentation today, and I have been looking forward to this with great anticipation. CSUB's Teacher Education Department Citizen Scientist Project and our guests are so fortunate to welcome Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, a preeminent scholar in educational leadership and African American studies. Dr. Ladson Billings has devoted her research to the intersection of race and education, a field of scholarship that has particular resonance today as we all contemplate our roles and responsibilities in advancing the long overdue reckoning of racial justice in our country. But in this moment of great hope, the challenges are abundant. A pandemic that has challenged our students to remain focused on their education, a revolution in how education is accessed and how we all interact with one another, a looming economic downturn that has the potential to divert our attention from the strides we wish to make in education and social justice. But this is a defining moment. And more than that, it's a defining movement. And this year of crisis, of courage, of tears, of tumult, of loss of growth, and of hope, and that's what we really believe in here at CSUB. This represents an awakening for the generation of students who are studying at CSUB and universities across the nation. These students will know a different world post 2020. These students will shape that world. As educators, it is up to us to give them the tools, the resources, the encouragement, and the access to learn. And then it is up to us to get out of their way and let them move us forward. We see the wisdom in that approach every day. It is our students who are demanding equity, justice, and inclusion. And it is our students who are speaking truth to power. It is our students who are raising their voices on behalf of the marginalized and disenfranchised. At CSUB, we have the passion and we have the heart for change. So today we will learn to channel that passion with the insights and wisdom of Dr. Ladson Billings, who will help us get beyond the old normal. I want to particularly thank Drs. Brittany Beck and Bree Evans Santiago for organizing this event today and inviting Dr. Ladson Billings for this important assessment of the world today and the way forward. These two incredible educational professors at CSUB make me proud every day, and I'm so happy to serve alongside you in your leadership. It is incredibly proud moment for the work that's being done on the Citizen Scientist Project, which is the model of collaboration and problem solving in our region. Even before the strides toward racial justice in our community, the Citizen Scientist Project was working to expand and amplify diversity in K-12 classrooms and fostering partnerships to imagine and work toward a more enlightened, inclusive era in education. And now, it is my great honor to introduce to you Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, President of the National Academy of Education, critically acclaimed author, Professor Emerita of the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Please join me in a CSUB welcome to Dr. Ladson Billings.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Zalesny. I'm so delighted to be here. Thank you for that very generous introduction. I have a couple of my fingers in the Cal State system in that my youngest son graduated from Cal State Chico, and I currently have a granddaughter who is a student and outstanding volleyball player for San Francisco State. So when you guys play again, whenever, and you see a Billings on the roster, that one belongs to me. Again, also thank you for Dr. Brittany Beck and her team for all of the logistics. If you're just tuning in, what you may not understand is just how much work goes on behind the scenes to make this happen. And so I've been delighted with all of the work that they've done to make me, through the magic of the internet, come and visit you. This is my third state this morning. I started out early in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and then went to Western Carolina in North Carolina. And so now I'm here in Bakersfield with you. Uh, so I want to get started. I am going to share my screen. I'm not enamored of PowerPoint, but one of the things that it does for me is it keeps me from rambling too much. So you should be seeing the first slide that has the title saying Time for a Hard Reset, Revisioning Education for Equity. And that's really what I want to talk about, the whole notion of revisioning. Um, I'll start by telling you a little bit about myself, as was in President Zelensky's introduction. I am Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That emerita means I am retired, but I can tell you quite frankly, I am failing at retirement. I'm not doing a good job at all, so I need to go back to retirement school and learn how to actually do it. I am the current president of the National Academy of Education, organization of about 200 scholars worldwide who are noted for their cutting edge and noted research. So if you are reading about education research, you're probably reading something that one of my members has written or produced. I'm also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm a fellow of the American Educational Research Association. So that's kind of who I am on paper, but I also like to share with people where I'm from. So you'll see four pictures there. The top picture, on the top left picture, is a skyline of the city of Philadelphia. I was born there, reared there, went to school there, came back and taught school there. So I have Philadelphia sort of deep in my soul. I still have some family members there. It's a very special place to me. And as someone who used to be a history teacher, I always talk about the US history starts in Philadelphia in some ways. The picture adjacent to it is at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, where I went to undergraduate school. I'm one of those folks who develops deep allegiances. So I am a life member of the Morgan State Alumni Association. Uh, Beneath the Philadelphia picture is a picture of what's fondly known in Seattle as the mountain and the fountain. It is taken on the campus of the University of Washington, where I did pursue a master's degree. I will tell you in full disclosure, you can only get this picture maybe about 5 to 7 days out of a year because it's so cloudy in Seattle. But this is one of those days where it's clear enough that you not only see the fountain on the campus, but in the distance, you can see Mount Rainier, which is a magnificent sight. And next to that is a picture of the chapel on the campus of Stanford University, where I ended up doing my doctoral degrees. And California is a place that I raised my family. So my sons think of themselves as Californians. My daughter thinks of herself as a Madisonian because she came with us to Madison at the age of 5. But our boys grew up in California. So I want to talk to you about a tale of four pandemics. Now, I know somebody's going, oh my God, four? Four? We can't have four, it's bad enough that we have one. But I want to suggest to you that, yeah, we're having multiple pandemics. This first one is the one we all know. It's the reason why I'm here talking to you as opposed to being in Bakersfield. It is a novel coronavirus, which is spiking in many places in the country. California seems to have plateaued a bit, but something like 41 of our states are seeing an increase, including here in Wisconsin. But we also are fighting a pandemic of anti-Black racism. This picture is all too familiar to so many people. the 8 minutes and 46 seconds in which Mr. George Floyd uh, was subdued by Officer Chauvin in Minneapolis by having his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck that caused him to die. What happened as a result of that were insurrections and uprisings and protests, not just across the nation, but around the world. So there were protests in France and the UK and in Canada. That's what makes it a pandemic, that it starts to circle the globe. And those two, I think you're pretty, may agree with me. Yeah, you're right. We have more than one pandemic. But have you thought about the fact that we have a coming economic collapse? It is trailing the coronavirus pandemic. We have people who are facing eviction from apartments or foreclosures on homes because they've been unable to work. Some have had to stay home with children because schools are closed, and so they have not been able to hold on to jobs. Not everybody can work from home. Some people have jobs that require them to be present, and they haven't been able to do it. And the reason that I'm calling it pandemic is because we know that the US economy is vital to economies throughout the world. So what happens here will reverberate around the globe. And then the next pandemic is one that you as Californians are indeed familiar with, and that is the climate catastrophe. The fires that the state of California have weathered this fire season are unprecedented. And again, I know this because two of my four children live in California. All five of my grandchildren are Californians. And I've heard about their inability to just go outside and enjoy fresh air because of the smoke that has impacted their experience there. So all four of these things are happening to our students. They're all trying to, we're trying to grapple with all four of these things. And as dire as these pandemics are, I want to suggest to you that there is a bit, maybe not much, but there is a bit of hope. And that hope comes through the writing of an Indian novelist and essayist by the name of Arundhati Roy. She says that historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. And this one is no different. It is a portal. That's an important part of that. It's a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So think about this, that the pandemic, and she's talking about it in India, but her point is we've had them before and they give us an opportunity to do something very differently. So I want to suggest to you that I'm always cognizant, even though I can't see you, I am cognizant that there's lots of people in the room or in the Zoom. Uh, and they typically break down into three categories. They are the puppy dogs. And I'm not saying this pejoratively. I'm saying that these are the eager, ready to run. Let's jump onto a new idea. Let's try something that we haven't tried before. Let's go with the flow on this one. Those are usually the folks that I don't have to do too much convincing to. At the bottom of those three photos are what I call the old dogs. Now, again, I'm not being pejorative. Old dogs have lots of expertise and experience, but sometimes old dogs are the ones who say, you know what? I've been at this long enough. I don't want to hear any more of this stuff. I'm not changing. I've been doing it my way for all these years. I'm not going to stop now. So I'm not sure I can convince old dogs around some things. But my target audience is often the group in the middle, who I call my tennis spectators. They are looking from side to side. And if you actually look at that picture carefully, you notice some people looking in one direction and some are looking in the other. That's what tennis spectators do. They go from side to side. And what tennis spectators in my field do is they're trying to figure out who's going to actually win here, old dogs or puppy dogs. And whichever group is going to win is the group that they will affiliate with. So I'm hoping we can show the puppy dogs to be winners here and convince some spectators to come along with us as we think about what it may mean to um, really educate for equity. We're hearing a lot of discussion about when we, quote, get back to school. Or another thing we hear people talk about is getting back to normal. I've got two photos there to kind of remind me of how different societies have figured out what to do. And the picture on the left side is out of West Africa. You see the children are socially distanced, they're wearing masks, and this is post Ebola that they had to deal with that epidemic. On the right side are students in South Korea who are post COVID 19. And you see, not only do they have masks, they are encased in plexiglass as a way to figure out how to do schooling. So, a lot of people are talking about when we get back, but I want to suggest to you that getting back to normal is not really an option for kids who were struggling and failing beforehand. Getting back to normal for them means, oh, I go back to the low reading group. Oh, I go back to being disproportionately identified for special needs. Oh, I go back to being overrepresented in the statistics surrounding suspension and expulsion. I go back to not being chosen for gifted and talented education. Oh, I go back to not making it into honors or AP. So, no, I don't want to get back. I don't want to go back to normal. I really do not. I reject that as the only op- um, option that we have. So, then what's the other option? Well, I'm going to use a metaphor here. All of us have one of these devices. You may not have this particular one, but you have one. It's in your purse, in your pocket, maybe sitting on your desktop. Some of you may be actually watching the presentation on your mobile device. And as a machine, you know that there are times when it doesn't work well. Something goes wrong. So, what you end up doing is a couple things. You may turn it off, let it just sit for a few minutes and turn it back on, sort of rebooting it. Hopefully that fixes it. But if it doesn't, then maybe your next course of action is to pull out the SIM card, and you pull it out and you kind of blow it off, make sure there's no dust or anything on it, and you put it back in and see if that helps. That doesn't help, maybe you pull out your battery and make sure that the terminals are clean. Then you put that back in. If that doesn't work, maybe you go to your laptop or your desktop and you look for a technical support group. See if you can join a conversation where people have your same problem. And when you get their responses, you may try something that they suggested. But if none of that works, then you are compelled to take yourself to the store where you got it. So whether it's the Apple store, or the Samsung, or Motorola, or whether it's your service provider's store, you end up at that place. And unfortunately, you encounter someone who's maybe about 17 years old wearing a t shirt who will tell you the following: I think you need a hard reset. It's the last thing you want to hear. Because what they are telling you is unless you have everything backed up, pictures, contacts, maybe even where you are in the Candy Crush game, everything is going away. And when I return this device to you, it'll be a lot like it was when you got it from the factory. it'll be a place where you must start over. So I'm using that metaphor to suggest that's kind of where we are in schools. We need to do a hard reset. Now, I didn't just make that up. There are some lessons from history. There are two pictures here that are post World War II pictures. The left side is a picture of from Japan, where after they um, were defeated, there was a bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They thought, you know what, we've got to do some different stuff as we educate our students, our children in this nation. We don't ever want to get back in this place again. And so one of the things that they did as a part of their hard reset was they expanded education opportunities for girls, because Japan was, and to some degree is still, a rather sexist nation where boys are so obviously privileged. But they said, you know, it makes no sense to have a half of a nation without a decent education. So that was a part of their hard reset. The other part of their hard reset was a decision to change organization. They used to just have elementary and secondary schools, but they looked to the United States and said, you know, there are some specific needs that early adolescents have that are different from older adolescents. And so they created their version of the middle school. It was a hard reset for them. On the right side, you have a picture from post-war Italy, and you will recall from your history lessons that Italy was also a part of the Axis, the defeated nations that had aligned with Nazi Germany. And after that defeat, the Italians decided, you know, we never want to walk down this road again. We don't want to ever create again a nation of fascists. So we need to start early on. And that start early on began with the creation of what's known as the Reggio Emilia preschool. So that's a picture from Reggio Emilia. I don't know about your early education program, but I know here in Wisconsin, we actually send students from our early childhood program over to Reggio Emilia to see the preschool so they get a better sense of what is it that the Italians had come up with as a different way to prepare students. So, like I said, those lessons are from history. Now, someone might say, yeah, but that was, you know, more than a half century ago. Uh, will that work here? Well, I asked you this question. Do you remember Katrina? Because what had to happen in Katrina was a hard reset. Schools were in a uh, terrible place, and most establishment educators were trying to, quote, get back to normal. While they were trying to get back to normal, there were a group of what might be described as neoliberal reformers who said, you know what? We could do something totally different and actually have money flow from public schooling into our organization. So you ended up getting these charter schools. They had monetized public education in ways that made it almost impossible for some of the poorest kids to even find a school to attend. But if you go to New Orleans today, there is, in effect, no public system. There's just a charter system. So I'm not suggesting that's what we want to do. I'm giving you this example to say that there's often people who are ready to reset. And our charge is to reset in ways that are fair and equitable, not in ways that line the pockets of just one group of folks. So the work that I've done, and I apologize for the way that the slide is kind of cut up the words here, but the work that I've done is something called culturally relevant pedagogy. Some of you may know it from this book, The Dream Keepers, which I put out the second edition, I believe, in 2009. I'm actually working on a third edition, so it's almost as if I can't get away from the Dream Keepers. Or if you read the education literature, you may know it from this book, excuse me, this journal, the American Educational Research Journal, but in the fall of 1995, published an article that I wrote about culturally relevant pedagogy. So, what is it? Well, If you have in mind a equilateral triangle, then you can begin to understand what it is that I want to talk about. Equal sides, equal angles, meaning all three tenets of culturally relevant pedagogy are equally important. Think of it like a three-legged stool. If you take one leg off a three-legged stool, you essentially have nothing, certainly nothing you can use. And what I'm suggesting to you is if you would call yourself doing culturally relevant pedagogy, but you're only doing two parts of it, then you're not doing it. You're doing something else. It needs all three parts. So let me go through three parts, identify them for you, and then try to explain them a little better. So one part is what we might think of as academic achievement, or I actually like the word student learning. I think when you say academic achievement, people think immediately about test performance, and it's broader than that. A second leg or angle or side is cultural competence, and I'll talk more about that later. And then the third one is socio-political consciousness or critical consciousness. Most people understand the student learning aspect of it and say, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do. A lot of people misunderstand what we mean by cultural competence, and even more people ignore the socio-political or critical consciousness aspect of it. So let me go through each of these to really say what I mean when I use these terms. So if we're going to support student learning, one of the enduring issues that we deal with is depth versus coverage. You know, I've often heard teachers say, well, I don't know why the kids didn't get this. I taught it. No, you covered it. But did you go in depth to ensure that they were learning it? Did you teach it for understanding? Or did you teach it to get through the syllabus or through the textbook or through the curriculum? A culturally relevant teacher is someone who is very interested in ensuring that kids are learning, not necessarily that uh, you are covering things. Also, a culturally relevant teacher is someone who understands that having a high failure rate doesn't equal rigor. It may indeed indicate that you're not a very good teacher because we want to ensure that students are learning, not just that you are teaching. So, an image that I would leave you with is that we have this sense that teaching is sort of like pushing students through a sieve. And the ones who, quote, get it come through on the other side. And those are the ones that we see as worthy. I think that's a bad metaphor. In fact, I would rather use one that suggests that our teaching should be more like a net, that we are committed to catching every single person, every single student. So if you've ever seen firefighters use a net, they're not using the net to say, "Oh, let's get some of these people." No, we've got to get all of them. And so they teach towards mastery. It's one of the things that I've really learned to do in my own teaching, particularly in the teacher ed program. So if you had a chance to see my syllabus, you would see that under evaluation, it has some words sort of to this effect. If you are aiming for an A in this course, then you must do all three required assignments at the level of an A and three optional assignments at the level of A. If you're aiming for an A minus, you have to do the three assignments at the level of an A minus, the required ones, and two optional assignments at the level of A minus. If you're aiming for a B, you must do all three required assignments at the level of a B and one optional assignment at the level of a B. And then I have the following statement. If you are aiming for a grade less than a B, you are in the wrong class. In other words, I lay out on the very first day that I expect you to master what we are doing. And I'm going to teach for that mastery. Now, some people, the students, of course, go, oh, great, I can get no lower than a B in this class. thinking, oh, it'll be easy. But at the end of the class, the semester, they will tell you, oh my gosh, it's probably the hardest class I had because every time I turned in something that was less than the grade I was aiming for, she returned it to me and had me redo it. Now, why am I doing that? Because I don't want to send out mediocre teachers. I want to send out excellent or at the least good teachers. And that's as low as I'm willing to go. That's how I would support student learning. The second tenet is the notion of cultural competence. And in here, what I'm talking about is the ability to be firmly grounded in one's own culture of origin and fluent in at least one other culture. I think a lot of times when people think cultural competence, they think, I need a list of things that you can tell me about Latinx students. I need a list of things that you can tell me about indigenous students or black students or Asian descent students. No. First of all, that's a very limited view of what culture is. Culture is dynamic. So any list you develop on Monday will be obsolete on Tuesday. Culture's dynamic and changing all the time. But we want our students to be firmly grounded in their own culture, that they know their history, that they know their language, that they know the customs and traditions that make them who they are. But we also want them to be fluent in at least one other culture. They don't have the luxury of not communicating and interacting with people who are different from themselves. So, what this means is that white students also need cultural competence. Can I tell you that one of the biggest challenges I've had moving to the Midwest was that I have a lot of students who don't believe that they have a culture. They have said things to me like, oh no, Dr. Ladson Billings, we're just normal. Oh, wow. So, does your being normal suggest that I am abnormal? Oh, no, 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 that's not what we mean. We're just regular. Oh, okay. I guess that's better. And maybe because of my age, you might assume that of me, but I don't know that I would want to be identified as it, but I'm irregular. Forcing my students to think about their own culture is one of the heaviest lifts of my teaching, because they have so normalized and regularized the way that they think and experience the world that they think, okay, well, everybody just needs to do what I'm doing. So, first of all, making evident to them what their own culture affords them, but then also helping them develop some fluency in a culture beyond their own. Because even if they live in rural Wisconsin, they are likely to interact with people from around the world. I had a very good experience on visiting a farm, a dairy farm in Wisconsin. If you know anything about Wisconsin, we are, quote, the dairy state. We are back and forth with California as to who is producing the most milk and the most cheese, you name it. But I went to a dairy farm. Very interesting place to go. As someone who used to teach history, I was really struck by the fact that that farm had been in the family since the end of the Civil War. In fact, President Lincoln gave that family the farm for fighting in the Union Army. But on that farm were three generations of farmers, all of whom, number one, had graduated from the University of Wisconsin's College of Agriculture and Life Science. But number two were just so culturally engaged because they had a group of interns on their farm from Portugal, from Korea, from the Netherlands, people from all around the world learning the latest techniques in dairy farming. And they themselves had been around the world. So even though they are, quote, rural, didn't mean they were unlearned. And it certainly didn't mean that they didn't need to be exposed to other cultures. The third um, tenet is this notion of social political critical or critical consciousness. And I use this picture of Thomas Jefferson because he's the one who argued, above all things, I hope the education of the common people will be attended to, convinced that on their good sense we may rely with the most security for the preservation of a due degree of liberty. Now, contradiction in all of this is the fact that Jefferson is owning human beings at the time, or at least believing that's possible. But the core of what he is saying is that the democracy cannot be sustained without the everyday person having an education. And so the socio-political or critical consciousness is not about partisanship. It's about, can our students make sense of the world in which they exist? And can they begin to solve problems in that world? So whether or not they can, let's think about that. I want to talk about the evolution of this work because the tenets are still intact, but it's changing. And so it's a question, if I was in the room with you, I would ask you, how many of you are on Twitter? And for those of you who are on, great. But for those of you who are not, I will tell you, you are already behind the curve when it comes to the students that we are seeing today. In fact, the real question might be how many people are on TikTok, because our students are just on these social media platforms all over the place. So whether or not you're on Twitter or on TikTok, what is sort of surprising to me is that I go into school buildings and see signs that look a lot like this, that urge students not to have a cell phone. It's mind blowing to me because these cell phones are pervasive, they're ubiquitous, and they are necessary. Um, but we say things like, well, we don't want them to have cell phones because they're distracting. Can I tell you, if you are 13 years old, everything is distracting? I've gone to single sex schools, and one of the reasons that people will give me for why they're not co ed is that they find the other sex distracting. If you're 13, can I tell you that a window in your classroom is distracting? Because you're looking outside to see what's going on out there. That's just the nature of being 13. We have to teach students the appropriate use of cell phones, and we have to do a better job of integrating these technologies into our teaching. Now, one of the things that the pandemic has forced us to do is use technology in different ways. The truth of the matter is that most of what our students are using is not really a cell phone. If you were to check their usage log, you will find that they don't make that many calls. They're busy texting or checking social media posts or looking up information. Maybe you have a cell phone, but they have a small computer. And there needs to be a way for us to integrate that computing power into our teaching. In my graduate classes, I often have a number of international students, particularly students from Asia, from Korea, Taiwan, China. And they're not comfortable speaking out in class because the kind of schooling that they've had before they've come to the university requires them to just listen to the teacher, not speak out. And as much as I've tried to push and prod them to speak out, they're just not comfortable. But what I discovered is that because everybody has a mobile device and I'm in a classroom with a smart board, I could establish a class hashtag and run a live Twitter feed. And all of a sudden, here are my international students tweeting questions or remarks and comments, something they would never do in real time, or raising their hands, excuse me, it is real time, but by speaking out in the classroom. So, because of this use of and integration of technology in our classrooms and in our lives, really, um, we have a new digital divide. It's not so much around race and ethnicity as it is around generations, that young people are using these technologies. So back in 1989, my dream keepers were folks who focused on the cultural history. For example, they looked at the things that their textbooks had omitted and tried to help students understand some of that distorted or omitted history. They also focused on community issues like urban renewal, or today what we might call gentrification. They focused on veterans' concerns because the district I was working with had a veterans hospital nearby, and they focused on homelessness. But they had a limited focus on student culture. In fact, they only had one teacher who used rap lyrics to teach poetry. But today's dream keepers have some different challenges. They need to include popular culture in their understanding of culture in general. Um, I didn't do much with popular culture because I was doing this research in elementary classrooms. Even though I'm a secondary person for research convenience, I used elementary classrooms because they're self-contained, they were easy to sort of manage as a researcher, as opposed to 150 students in different classes for each teacher. Um, and unfortunately, elementary kids are not producers of youth culture. They're consumers of it, but they don't produce it. We also need to recognize what I would call hip hop's longevity um, and its place in today's world. You know, and a lot of people talk about, you know, when hip hop first burst on the scenes, all we heard was, oh, that stuff's not going to last. Well, I can tell you as someone who has taught a course on hip hop in education, I often ask students, who introduced you to hip hop? And the answer in 9 out of 10 times is my parents. So here I am teaching the children of hip hop eds. So hip hop is 40 years into, quote, not lasting. We also need to catch up with Madison Avenue because Madison Avenue has figured out there's something about this genre. There's something about hip hop that speaks to young people. And so I want to give you an example of a 1992 commercial, Fruity Pebbles. So this is almost 30 years ago. And General Mills had figured out there's something about this hip hop.
You watch me get Fred's Fruity Pebbles.
Who are you?
I'm the master rapper and I'm here to sing. I love Fruity Pebbles in a major way.
He loves Fruity Pebbles in a major way.
The bedrock yellow, orange, purple, lime, and red. But to get the fruity taste, I gotta trick Fred. Fruity.
To get the fruity taste, he's got to trick Fred. Barney.
Guess that's a wrap.
Post Fruity Pebbles cereal, part of this nutritious breakfast. Yabba-dabba delicious.
So here is I said General Mills is actually Post. Here's this company that's figured out that there's a way to appeal to a market by using hip hop. For those of you who know your hip hop history, you know that Barney was invoking Run DMC. He had on a pork pie hat, he had the wraparound sunglasses, he had on a gold chain, and if you actually paid attention, Barney had on a pair of Adidas. When have you ever seen the Flintstones with any shoes on? So there's something about that culture that is speaking to our young people. And they have kept up with it. I put that link in there in case you want to go back and look at that commercial. And they are still focused on doing this.
Hello? Yeah. I can't find it. I'm looking for it right now. One second, buddy. They say quit, they say done. They say we're too grown for fun. They say old, we say young. We say playful's never done. Don't fight the feeling, just let it flow. Stack it up, rack it up, let it go. Laughter is calling, pick up the phone. Let's stay playful, Oreo. Everyone's welcome, don't need a label. If we're still smiling, the future's bueno. I got a secret the world should know. Let's stay playful, Oreo. Hello? Psych. And when you do, every day's full. For every moment, we're grateful. No half, our glass all the way full. Yeah, yup, stay playful.
So here's a Nabisco company using Wiz Khalifa to sell Oreo cookies. They figured out there's something about that culture that is speaking to a market we're trying to reach. It's unfortunate that we as teachers and educators often think, well, that doesn't belong in school. Don't bring any of that in here. I want us now to kind of think about what does all of this that we're dealing with, the pandemics, uh, post the COVID, the racial injustice, the protests that we're seeing, what does that mean to us as educators? And so I want us to be thinking about these things. First of all, remembering what happened post Katrina, and I sort of tipped my hand on that one when I suggested that on the one hand, there's a bunch of folks who just say, well, let's just go back to what we had before, as opposed to a group of people plotting, scheming, saying, you know what, there's an opportunity for us to do this different and to profit from it. I want you also to be thinking about the changed assumptions we have as a result of these pandemics. For example, who can actually have access to digital devices? Before COVID-19, if you said give the kids tablets or give them laptops, give them Chromebooks, we said things like, oh no, we can't trust them with that. But we had to trust them when we shut schools down because it was our only way to reach them. Or how important are the tests? Before COVID-19, we insisted you must give these tests every spring. And in fact, everything we were doing was aimed at the test, the test, the test. Well, we've had a spring without the tests. The world has not come to a screeching halt because we didn't do those tests. I'm not suggesting that the tests are not important, but how important are they? I want us to be able to put those tests in the proper perspective. I want us to be thinking about the role of social emotional learning and our mental health needs, and I'll get back to that again. But it's just not about academics. And in fact, we need to be considering how we rethink education. What does it mean to be educated in the 21st century? Does it mean the same thing it meant in the 19th century? Because that's how we have school organized, very much like it was in the 19th century. So, if you look at culturally relevant pedagogy, let's look at the components in a post COVID 19 racial injustice protest world. What does count as learning? I've heard so much about how there's been COVID slide and learning loss and what have you. But I want to suggest to you that if you remember your human relations, excuse me, your human development courses, whether it's been child development or adolescent development, you know that human beings are always learning. It's not possible for them not to have been learning. Now, are they learning the academic stuff you want them to learn? Are they learning the school curriculum? Probably not. But we know just by looking at who was engaged in the protests that young people were doing a lot of the work. They were learning. How do we determine what students know versus what they have? Do you know that sometimes we give credit for what students have, not what they know? You know, the student who comes in with this incredible science project that you know no 9-year-old could have done, but that same 9-year-old is the child of a nuclear engineer. So because he has a parent or she has a parent who has all of these resources, we are giving the student credit for it. We're not really determining what students know. And before all of the teachers start throwing things at me, can I tell you that I'm just not a fan of homework? It bothers me that we put so much emphasis on something that we can't directly supervise. I have 4 children, 5 grandchildren. I spend a lot of time in schools. And I also know that I spend a lot of time sitting there, quote, doing homework. But my kids got credit for it. You're giving them credit for what they have, an educated parent, as opposed to what they know. I've talked about this a lot already, but just want to remind you, if we can put these tests in their proper perspective. I did a talk yesterday for Stanford University, and one of the things that Stanford is seriously considering is doing away with the SAT. Oh my God, we're not going to have the SAT? Think about that. They're saying it didn't give us that much information to begin with, but we just use it as a gatekeeper. And then finally, can we measure academic progress versus fixed external standards? What do I mean by that? Imagine a fifth grade teacher who has a youngster come into her class reading at the second grade level. But that teacher, being so diligent and on top of things, gets that student to the fourth grade level by the end of the spring. Okay, second grade to fourth grade, 2 years of progress in 1 year. But guess what? The fixed external standard, the state test, is still going to say the student is below basic because that student is not at the fifth grade. I'm more interested in the progress. Where did the students start and where do they end? What does a post COVID 19 racial injustice protest cultural competence looks like? What is the role of youth culture? What is it that young people do that we can incorporate into our teaching? What's the role of the socioeconomic differences? Is a Black or Latinx student who is of a solidly middle class background the same as a Black or Latinx student who is poor? How does their social economic differences manifest in the classroom? How do we help our teachers understand disparity? What it's like to, quote, really be struggling economically, to not have certain things. And then what's the role of digital literacy? One of the things that I'm hoping will happen as a result of these pandemics is that the IT departments with which we work will stop being something over on the side that we just call when our internet doesn't work or we have a problem with email. The IT people should be more than a resource. They should be in the center of our work because we are in the 21st century. They should be full partners in instructional delivery. We now know we need them. And in fact, some people are struggling because they haven't really been able to engage IT in ways that are instructionally productive. And then around the notion of um, critical or socio-political consciousness, what are the questions we need to engage? You know, there are some things that are important questions to students. I think a lot of times we want to do these kinds of socio-political or critical consciousness problem solving and projects around our own agendas. So, for example, I've been in schools where kids are working on saving the rainforest, and when I have a conversation about them about why they're doing it, they shrug their shoulders and say, "I don't know. This is something she likes." We have to help kids engage in the problems that concern them. So I was in a high school once, and the youngsters were complaining about the school's hat rule. And it wasn't so much that the school had a rule that suggests you cannot wear a hat in the building, but they were concerned about the unequal um, distribution of sanctions around the hat rule. So they told me, well, if you were white and or if you were an honor student, they'll tell you to take your hat off, but that's the end of it. But if you happen to be Black and particularly Black and male or Latinx and male, not only do you get told to take your hat off, you get a detention or you end up in the vice principal's office. So I said to the students, do you know that for a fact or do you know that because it's been your experience, which is in research language is anecdotal? They said, well, it happened to me. I said, let me talk to your teacher. And so, because as a teacher I was working with, we designed a project in which she divided the students into 4 groups, one for each grade level. And so somebody's working with the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. They designed a survey. They got the demographic information for everyone they surveyed. We did some work on sampling. How many people do you need to get in a survey for it to be a valid survey? And here's what they found, that their anecdotal experience was exactly the experience. And they shared that in a report they pulled together for their administrators. You can also be doing some things with young children. One school I went to, the kids were complaining about the lunch menu, and they said there were certain items that keep showing up on the lunch menu that nobody likes. I said, nobody likes it? They said, well, hardly anybody. How do you know? Again, where's the data? The teacher helped the students design an experiment, a project, in which they actually measured how much waste happened on the days when that particular lunch was served versus on the days when something more popular was served. Again, they were able to use their reading, writing, their mathematics skills. So it's not that you just do these things so the kids have, quote, fun. You want to employ the very things that you want them to know to be able to solve a problem that they're concerned about. How do we help the public understand our changing needs? We now know, the public is kind of on our side a little bit right now because, moms and dads are having to teach their own kids and they're saying it's no walk in the park. But our needs are changing. We are not just teaching academics. For what social emotional learning do we prepare? I've been talking to principals, I've been talking to superintendents, and over they're saying, wow, we had no idea how important the social emotional needs of our students and our staff are. We didn't know. We've just been so focused on test scores and, academics that we didn't pay attention to the way in which our students were really crying out to us about their social and emotional needs. And linked to that, how do we help students cope with what I'm calling pandemic trauma? All of the students, and in fact, most of the staff have some social emotional needs that we need to attend to. But some of our students have been hit very hard and directly with this coronavirus. Some of them have been hit very hard and directly around racial injustice, that it's not something they just see on the news. They know people who have died, whether it is a family member, a friend, or a neighbor. And coupled with that is because of the coronavirus, they haven't been able to have a ritual that is important to closure. There hadn't been the kind of funerals that they're used to in which you bring the whole family and the community together to celebrate a life. Funeral director has told you you can only have 7 people in the funeral home. The church has said you can only have 10 people. That's not the way we're used to doing that. So our kids are walking around with this trauma within them. I want to end with giving you an example of a culturally relevant student project that shows what we can do when we combine the students' interests with the kinds of things that we are trying to convey academically. So.
Neighborhoods are ovens with windows. And as the knob on global warming increases, lives are preheated until a soul souffles. Pancake stack projects are poured over with a humid as thick as molasses. Heat and humidity are the perfect appetizer on death's plate. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from May to October, and senior citizen discount is every day. If thermometers can measure temperatures, they should be able to measure human anxiety. As the temperature rises, we reach boiling points. Attitudes of those around us rise quicker than mercury, and the pressure of staying cool causes us to explode. Compressed living complexes circulate heat and cause compressed feelings to converge upon our neighbors in the hood. So that 90% release of excess body heat talked about in science class is contributed to our local temperature rising. We crack open fire hydrants until we hear lights crying, raising taxes by lowering our body temperature. And if you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces are frozen. Audiences applaud the ice cream man once that familiar jingle mingles with our ears. This sweet release of flooded heat is a godsend. But what do you know? The ice cream vendor's name is Noah. As the temperature rises, so do attitudes, death rates, bills, and ice cream stocks. Heat affects the elderly more than it does us. Their lungs resemble the Dow Exchange, rises and drops until they crash. Ambulances are summoned, riding down the street flooded with the contents of the only fire hydrant. And we have only just begun to fry.
I wanted to share that with you because that young man, Elijah Perquan, is someone that we recruited to the University of Wisconsin as a part of our award-winning hip-hop arts program, First Wave. Elijah has gone on to earn a degree in environmental studies. He works with climate change, does climate change work as a professional, but it was his youth culture, his love of spoken word, of sort of the whole hip hop aesthetic that drew him in to the academic. So yeah, it's time for a reset. It's time to make sure that that reset takes into account the place of equity in what we are trying to do. And it's also time to understand that the pandemics that we are facing are but portals, and we do have the opportunity to enter into the other side of those portals into a new world, a world that is worth fighting for. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ladson Billings. Before we get into questions, I just wanted to say that as puppies, we have a responsibility right now to get our spectators on our side, right? And maybe even teach an old dog new tricks, hopefully. We're experiencing 4 pandemics, and now is the time for us to get into a hard reset for fairness and equity. So we thank you for that talk today. Thank you. And before we get into questions, I need to address that we have people from the CSU, the Chancellor's office here with us. And so you were mentioning the other CSUs. We wanted to actually thank Assistant Vice Chancellor, Dr. Marquita Greno-Shire is also with us today for the Educator Preparation Public Schools program. So we wanted to personally thank her for joining us and being a part of this today. Thank you for all others that are here, any leaders and academic support that we have. And also thank you, Citizen Science, for funding this program. So we wanted to get into some question and answers before some people start jumping off. So the first question that we have for you is, using hip hop in the classroom is like introducing a hypnotic drug. Can you share some best practices to introducing and integrating hip hop into the curriculum and classroom?
Thanks for that question, because I think when I say that, people think they all of a sudden have to become themselves hip hop heads, that they have to know every one of the latest songs or what have. That's not what I mean at all. So what I often will say is, instead of just having you use hip hop, I want you to quote, be hip hop. So what are some principles of being hip hop? One is flipping something out of nothing. In other words, it wasn't there, and now you've made it a new thing. I have a teacher former student of mine that I love dearly, a gentleman by the name of Matt Cohn, who teaches in the Carborough High Schools. Actually, Matt is a Californian. He was a Berkeley grad. But Matt teaches in North Carolina, and he teaches a course on global health, global poverty and global health. That class didn't exist before. He flipped it into something. And it is one of the most dynamic classes I've ever seen. In fact, I visited them 2 weeks ago, where they had as their guest Sarah Collins Rudolph. Now that name might not mean very much to you, But if you knew anything about the 4 little girls who were killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church that
Mhm.
was bombed in Birmingham,
Mhm.
Sarah's the 5th girl.
Oh,
She
okay.
lived, but she lost an eye. And to this day, she has a glass in the other eye that the ophthalmologists refuse to remove because they are afraid she will lose her sight altogether. And so recently, the governor of Alabama made an apology to her. But she said, you know, they still haven't paid my medical bill. I've been paying over 50 years of medical bills. And
Right.
so here's, you know, he flipped something out of nothing. There was no such course. And he does these amazing things with students around that course. The other thing that being hip hop means is understanding that you have to have a fresh beat. In other words, a fresh beat yesterday is just that, a fresh beat yesterday. Now we're in today. So it's going to
Right.
require you to be doing new things. And then thirdly, to be hip hop suggests to be creatively resourceful, to begin to use things that you hadn't thought about using. So I always give the example of Sam Seidel's notion that when um, in the 60s, excuse me, in the 80s, when people started getting rid of their linoleum floors because they wanted to
Mhm.
put in tile, hip hop heads use that linoleum and turn it into dance floors.
There you
So
go.
the b-boying, so being creatively resourceful. That's what being hip hop is for to me. I will tell you, I am a 90s hip hop person. I don't
Yes.
like a lot of this stuff. I don't want to hear no mumble rap. I'm not really into some of this trap stuff. You know, give me a cool Mo D, give me
Mhm.
a Eric B, you know, I mean, that's me, right?
Yes.
Um, but one of the things I do in all of my classes is that I create a playlist. I
Mhm.
have the students suggest, what do you want to hear? And at a high school level, if I were to do it, I would set the parameters. It can't be misogynistic, it can't be racist, it can't be heterosexist or homophobic. It can't have a bunch of cursing. You know, don't
Mhm.
bring me nothing with the N word in it. Okay, those are students can do that,
Right.
and I do create those playlists. It's one of the reasons why students will rush to come to class because they don't know if their song's coming up that morning. So it's those kinds of things. And people say, well, how, you know, I'm too old, I can't do this. You have to do it the way you do anything else new. You have to study it. I have read
Mhm.
more books on hip hop in the last 3 or 4 years than I could imagine. And there's a ton of literature on it.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for that answer. The next one is, how can we facilitate student use of technology to engage them in active learning, not passive consumption?
Yeah, and as I said, I went and visited with some students in Baltimore at a high school. And one of the questions I had for them was whether or not how they felt about virtual learning. And I was certainly expecting them to all be complaining. And I just remember this one kid said, "Oh, I love it." And I
Mhm.
said, "Really? What do you love about it?" He said, "When she gets on my nerves, I just turn her off." You know, he said, "I couldn't do that in the classroom. I had to sit there and listen to her just drone on and on." He, and I said, "Well, what happens if she kind of calls you on the fact that you're not there?" He said, "Oh, I just tell her that I got bad internet connectivity.
Oh
You know."
no.
So, one of the things that I think that this um, switching to virtual learning or remote learning can do for us is have the students teach us because they're much more facile and comfortable with the technology. They don't think they're going to
Mhm.
break anything, you know, by trying
Right.
something. And so it creates a kind of reciprocal relationship that we haven't had in the past. We've always had this sort of top down, I'm the teacher, you're the student, you listen to me. Well, now
Mhm.
because of the students' abilities, and some of the best teachers I'm starting to see online are students. There's a young man who was teaching mathematics, and he has kind of gone global. I mean, and you hear the comments of other students say, oh, I understand this so much better when you teach it.
Mhm.
So, I mean, our students can be parts of teaching learning collaborations that we never thought about before we had to do all of this virtual learning.
Absolutely. All right. So we have one more. We see that other people are jumping in, but we're supposed to stop at 11:15. But we'll do one more question, and then we have to let Dr. Ladson Billings take a break. So one more question for you. How does your work connect to the current work of culturally sustaining pedagogy, referencing Aleem and Paris?
So if you got that Aleem and Paris book, you know I'm in the book, right?
That's right. I know.
And in fact, they came to me when they first started about this idea. We did a presentation in, I believe we were in San Francisco at the American Educational Research Association. I was the discussant for this conversation. It expands the work. And
Yes.
in fact, there's another article I wrote in the Harvard Ed Review called Culturally Relevant Pedagogy 2.0, the Remix.
Yes.
And it's there where I talk about the importance of youth culture and what, you know, that's part of the sustaining work. So, you know, both Sammy and Django are good friends of mine.
Mhm.
They just open it up more. That's all it, you know, that's what they do.
Thank you. Again, thank you so much for your time to be able to share with so many of us this early morning. And again, thank you for your research and contributions to social justice. And as a researcher and teacher educator myself, I speak for many when I say that we pledge to continue to do this work. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And also thank you again to our president, Dr. Lynette Zelezny, for joining us this morning. And then also Brittany Beck, if you had any closing comments for us.
Of course, yes. My name is Dr. Brittany Beck. I'm Assistant Professor of Teacher Education and Director of the Citizen Scientist Project. And in addition to thanking Dr. Ladson Billings, CSU President Lynette Zelezny, and from the CSU Chancellor's Office, Dr. Marquita Greenwich-Shire, I also want to take a moment to thank CSU Northridge and their Department of Deaf Studies, who reached out to us and collaborated to offer the service of live translation for American Sign Language. So thank you for providing that valuable service and for educating us on best practices, which is something that we'll continue to use in all of our events moving forward. As a next step, you're going to receive a follow-up email from us. It's going to have information for how to access this recording, which will be available on the Citizen Scientist Project website until November 30th of this year. In case you wanted to watch it again, take notes, share it with your students. It'll be free and openly available. In that email will also be information for how to continue to engage with similar events that we're going to have this academic year. And there are so many wonderful questions. We're also going to capture those questions and include those in the follow-up email. So you know what we as a community educators are grappling with right now. So thank you again for your attendance, and I look forward to continuing to engage with you as a community of educators engaged in this critical work.
Thank you again.
So Brittany, am I coming back in on the same link?
No, it'll be a different link.
Okay.
To the other meetings today.
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right, applause.